I never expected trouble when I inherited my grandfather's farm. The gentle rolling hills, sprawling over 15 acres, had been our family for generations, quietly preserving our memories and legacy. My weekdays were spent in the rush of city life, handling permits and inspections as a senior building inspector for the county. But weekends belonged to my farm, a peaceful haven away from bureaucracy and stress. Every Friday evening, I drive from my cramped apartment downtown out to the old farmhouse, feeling immediate calm as my tires crunched over the familiar gravel driveway. Mornings meant tending my small vegetable garden, collecting eggs from the chickens, and watching the sunrise bathe my fields in golden light. Grandpa's farm wasn't just property. It was a living, breathing piece of our family history, untouched by greed or ambition. But that quiet life I cherished came crashing down one fateful Tuesday morning, the day I discovered strangers staking out my south pasture, my land, and my legacy was about to face the biggest battle yet. It started with a low rumble of engines echoing through the hills. I was collecting eggs when I heard it, not the sound of a passing truck, but something persistent. Curious, I wiped my hands on my jeans and followed the noise over to the south edge of my property. As I crested the hill, I froze. 3 men in matching polo shirts were hammering survey stakes into the ground. A fourth person, a woman with platinum blonde hair, crisp slacks, and oversized designer sunglasses, was directing them with sharp, confident gestures. Their presence on my land sent a jolt of alarm through me. "Excuse me," I called out, jogging down the hill. "What exactly do you think you're doing on my property?" The woman turned toward me, her smile cool and practiced. "You must be the current occupant." "I'm Eleanor Hargrove, president of the Meadowlark Estates Homeowners Association." Homeowners Association? I blinked. This is private farmland. There is no HOA here. Eleanor's smile tightened. According to our records, this parcel was incorporated into the Meadowlark Estates development last month. We're preparing to break ground on a convenience station here next week. My stomach sank. That's not possible. I never agreed to anything like that. She handed me a thick folder. All the paperwork is finalized. You're welcome to raise any questions with our legal team. I flipped it open, stunned to find a commercial rezoning approval stamped and signed, with my name scribbled at the bottom. "This isn't my signature," I said, voice rising. "This is forgery. Be careful with accusations," Eleanor said calmly, her tone suddenly icy. "We have powerful legal representation, and the sheriff is a member of our board." I looked around at the survey stakes, the equipment, and the smug expressions on their faces. Something was deeply wrong here. But what they didn't know, what I hadn't told them, was that they had just picked a fight with the one person who had the authority to shut the entire operation down. I stepped back up the hill, folder clutched in my hand, heart pounding. It was clear they weren't just bluffing, they believed they were untouchable. I needed proof. As they continued placing stakes, I took photos of their equipment, the documents, and their vehicle, an unmarked white truck with tinted windows and no visible plates. Everything felt wrong. That afternoon, I drove straight to the county records office and requested a search on any rezoning applications related to my property. The clerk, a quiet guy named Dennis I'd worked with on several permit reviews, looked confused. "There's nothing recent filed for your parcel," he said. "Last entry was a septic system maintenance renewal 4 years ago. But this says my land was rezoned just last month," I replied, laying the documents out in front of him. He scanned them, frowning. "These look official, but this stamp," he pointed to the approval seal, "that's not the current version. It was replaced 6 months ago. So they were using outdated templates. Clever, but sloppy." I was halfway back to the farm when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Back off," a voice growled. "You're making things harder than they need to be." I pulled over, heart racing. "Who is this?" Silence. Then a slow chuckle. "Just someone trying to make life easier for everyone. Keep pushing, and you won't like how this ends." The call dropped. I stare at the screen, my knuckles white around the steering wheel. They weren't just bluffing. They were willing to threaten me. But I wasn't about to back down. They might have the sheriff, lawyers, and fake paperwork, but I had the law and a badge they hadn't seen yet. The next morning, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway as I was feeding the chickens. The deputy I didn't recognize stepped out, his face unreadable. "Are you the property owner?" he asked, already holding out an envelope. "Fifth generation," I replied. "What's this?" "A cease and desist order." You're prohibited from interfering with the Medhork Estates development project. On what grounds? They're trespassing on my land. I snapped. Ms. Hargrove filed a complaint for harassment of her work crew, he said flatly. The county has granted temporary access for their survey and preparation work. My jaw dropped as he walked away without another word. Within minutes, another crew showed up, this time with fencing materials and small earth movers. They began outlining the area near the creek, where Grandpa and I used to fish. I took more photos, made notes, but I knew the usual channels wouldn't help. The sheriff's office, zoning board, and even my own department seemed compromised. I was being boxed in. That night, a utility truck appeared at the edge of my property. I approached the driver, who claimed he was there to assess lines for future fuel station connections. Who authorized this? I demanded. Says right here, County Infrastructure Division. He showed me an email on his tablet. I recognized the name. It was my supervisor. The same one who hadn't returned any of my calls since yesterday. The message was clear. They had the power to bend the rules, twist the system, and isolate me from every angle. They wanted me to give up. But if they thought I was going to roll over, they didn't know who they were dealing with. The next day, I stood at the edge of my pasture as the crew returned. Eleanor was with them again, barking orders while sipping an iced latte from a stainless steel tumbler. This time, I didn't wait for them to approach. I walked directly into their setup zone, pulled my badge from my back pocket, and held it up. Senior Building Inspector, County of Glenmore. You're about to violate half a dozen construction codes. Eleanor's smirk faltered. Excuse me? No commercial construction can begin without site safety checks, environmental clearance, and aquifer protection permits, I continued calmly. And since this property sits directly on a protected watershed zone, those approvals fall under my department. One of the workers glanced at another nervously. Eleanor's grip on her tumbler tightened. This is not your jurisdiction, she snapped. Actually, it is, I replied, tapping my ID against my badge. And as of this moment, I'm issuing a stop work order under County Code 35.7. Any further activity here will result in immediate penalties and possible legal action. For a second, no one moved. Then the lead contractor slowly lowered his clipboard. We'll pack up. Eleanor glared at me, but said nothing. They left without another word. As I stood in the settling dust, badge still in hand, I realized I just shifted the playing field. They had power. But now they knew I had it too. I knew a temporary stop wouldn't be enough. If I was going to protect my land and expose the truth, I needed hard proof, paper trails, names, signatures, dates, and every shady approval that passed through the cracks. I met up with Marcos, my most trusted colleague in the zoning department. We'd worked on dozens of projects together, and I knew he hated corruption as much as I did. I filled him in on everything, showing him the forged documents Eleanor had handed me. His eyes narrowed. This is not just a rezoning issue. This is fraud at multiple levels. Let's check the internal system. Together, we combed through county databases, zoning requests, and digital logs. A pattern emerged. Multiple projects under the name MGC Holdings, a shell company, were being approved across the county, all centered around a planned infrastructure expansion. My property? Dead center of it. That's the same name printed on the survey stakes, I muttered. They're prepping for a major development, Marco said, scanning blueprints. Probably a gas station hub connected to a new highway exit. And they can't build it unless they control your land. We downloaded everything we could find, permits, emails, scanned signatures. Marcos found approval forms dated the week I was on vacation, with signatures forged in my name. They waited until you were off the grid, he said, shaking his head. They thought you'd never notice. I placed a hand over the screen, grounding myself. They forged my signature. They filed fake zoning paperwork. They tried to erase my history. But now I had their roadmap, and I wasn't going to let them win. Just as I was beginning to connect the dots, the pressure dialed up fast. The next morning, I woke to the sound of engines again. I threw on boots and ran out the door to see a convoy of heavy machinery pulling up alongside my property. Bulldozers, diggers, and a water truck. Eleanor was already there, standing smugly by a black SUV. We're moving forward, she said before I could speak. Emergency authorization from the county executive's office. I scanned the document she handed me. It was filled with signatures and seals, none of which matched the standard formats used by my department. Worse, the permit date was yesterday, the same day Marcos and I had pulled those forged documents. I called Marcos in a panic. They brought bulldozers. They say they have emergency authorization. He was already on it. I just checked the system. There's no such permit. It's fake. Again. As I hung up, Eleanor approached me with a hard smile. You should think very carefully about continuing this crusade. You're outnumbered, outmatched, and soon out of a job. That evening, I received an official notice of a pending job review hearing. Marcos texted me minutes later. They've already started talking about replacing you. They weren't just trying to build illegally. They were trying to erase me. My authority, my reputation, my legacy. The message was clear. Back off or be destroyed. But I'd seen too much. And I had too much to lose. If they were going to come after me, they'd better be ready, because I wasn't done fighting. The next morning, I wasn't alone. As I stepped outside, bleary-eyed from a sleepless night, I saw something I never expected. 3 elderly neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder at the edge of my property, holding homemade signs. Stop the fraud. One read, another, this land isn't yours. Leading them was Margaret Tanner, a retired schoolteacher and former resident of Sycamore Heights, another neighborhood steamrolled by Eleanor's HOA. You're not the first, Margaret said grimly. But you might be the last if we don't stop them. Behind her came others, retired farmers, small business owners, and families who'd all been bullied off their land or priced out by rising fake HOA fees. They called themselves the Resistance. And they came armed, not with weapons, but with stories, photos, documents, and most importantly, names. Harold Jenkins, a soft-spoken Vietnam vet, handed me a binder thick with affidavits and financial statements. They seized my property with a forged tax lien. I lost everything, he said, eyes burning with quiet fury. Marcos arrived later that afternoon, wide-eyed. You've started something, he said. People are coming forward. There are more cases than we thought. The Hargroves have been pulling this scam for years. Together, we set up shop in my living room, using every wall and table to lay out our findings. Fake companies, shell organizations, bribed officials, forged minutes from zoning board meetings. It was all there. The Resistance wasn't just about saving my land anymore. We were going to expose everything and take them all down piece by piece. The night after we mapped out every link in their fraudulent empire, I was jolted awake by the deafening crash of shattering glass. Smoke. Flames. The living room, the heart of our operation, was engulfed in fire. I grabbed the blanket, my dog, and the lockbox with all the original family deeds. Outside, I found Mrs. Tanner's grandson, coughing, eyes wide with panic. I saw someone throw something through your back window, he gasped. Then they drove off, no plates. The fire department arrived too late. Everything we hadn't scanned or backed up was gone. My walls, my grandfather's chairs, the physical documents, ashes. The fire chief's report came the next day. Faulty wiring. But the smirk on his face when he handed it over told me everything I needed to know. Marcos met me in the parking lot of a local diner. They're deleting files from the county servers, he whispered, showing me his locked-out screen. Permits, deeds, even staff emails gone. The HOA was playing for keeps. But what they didn't know was that I'd already made multiple backups and distributed them to members of the Resistance. More importantly, I had evidence stored on encrypted drives off-site and a direct contact at the FBI. The fire didn't destroy our case. It lit a fuse. And now there was no going back. The next county council meeting was standing room only. News of the fire had spread like wildfire, no pun intended, and whispers of corruption had finally reached the public's ears. Seniors who'd lost their homes, young families priced out of their neighborhoods, even skeptical reporters lined the back of the room. Eleanor and Thomas Hargrove sat confidently at the center table, surrounded by their legal team. Their smugness made my stomach churn. I approached the podium, calm but burning inside. Members of the council, I began projecting my voice. What's happening in this county is not just unlawful, it's inhumane. I inserted the encrypted flash drive into the council's main terminal. Instantly, the screen behind me filled with records, emails proving collusion between officials, financial transfers to shell accounts, and side-by-side comparisons of forged documents. The room murmured. The tension cracked. Then came the final blow, a recording of Thomas's voice. The inspectors being a problem. If we handle it like Riverdale, no one will trace it. Eleanor's got the paperwork ready. Just make sure the fire looks accidental. Yes. Someone in the crowd shouted. Did he just admit to arson? Council members shifted uneasily. Reporters scrambled to record video. Eleanor stood abruptly, trying to cut the mic, but it was too late. Then a voice from the back. Federal agents, stand down. Two men in dark suits entered, followed by uniformed FBI officers. Thomas and Eleanor Hargrove, you are under arrest for conspiracy, forgery, wire fraud, and attempted arson, one agent announced. Handcuffs clicked. Cameras flashed. The council chamber, once a tool of their power, now became the stage of their downfall. And for the first time since this all began, I felt like we were winning. In the days that followed, headlines dominated every local news outlet. HOA empire crumbles, county officials linked to fraud ring, and my personal favorite, farm inspector exposes high-level corruption. The FBI's investigation widened. With Thomas and Eleanor flipping on their partners to lighten their sentences, more names emerged. Judges, clerks, and developers who had all taken bribes or turned blind eyes. Arrests followed like dominoes. The fake HOA was dissolved, its assets frozen and redirected to restitution funds. Dozens of families received compensation. Stolen properties were returned. As for me, I was reinstated to the county office, but this time with a new role, leading the task force on ethics and permitting oversight. Marcos became my second in command. Together, we implemented new transparency measures that made it impossible for future schemes like the Hargroves to take root. I returned to my land with a fresh sense of peace. Where scorched earth once smoldered, volunteers from the community helped me plant a new garden. The Resistance, now a formal watchdog group, held monthly gatherings in the rebuilt barn. We even hosted legal workshops to help homeowners understand their rights. The farmhouse was restored, but I left one fire-scorched beam exposed above the mantel, a reminder that fighting for justice sometimes costs something, but it's always worth it. And every time I walked my property, I remembered what Grandpa used to say, this land doesn't just feed us, it keeps us grounded. Now it stood for something even bigger, accountability, unity, and a promise that no one would steal from us again. 6 months later, the land was alive again. Where the HOA once planned to pour concrete and sell fuel, rows of tomatoes, squash, and sunflowers now stood tall and proud. Children from nearby neighborhoods came every Saturday to help in the garden and learn how to plant seeds. Mrs. Tanner, now something of a local legend, led storytelling circles in the evenings, passing down histories the Hargroves tried to erase. The rebuilt barn served as our community center. It hosted everything from town halls to potlucks to free legal clinics, run by a team of volunteer attorneys who had joined our cause after the news broke. Everywhere I looked, I saw what we had built, not just with nails and wood, but with courage, truth, and relentless unity. People who once lived in fear now stood tall, helping others protect what was theirs. The Resistance evolved into a county-wide alliance. We drafted new legislation, demanded oversight on all future development projects, and kept the pressure on elected officials. The days of unchecked power were over. One morning, while walking the same trail Grandpa and I used to take to the creek, I paused beneath a blooming dogwood tree. A wooden sign hung from it now, carved by one of the local teens. The land fights back when it has someone to fight for it. I smiled. Because it did. And we won.